An innocent organic farmer became a legend after transforming an attempted extortion into the most shocking showdown in Willow Ridge's history. After finding solace in farming, a decorated naval SEAL was compelled to return to duty when the infamous Iron Fangs motorcycle gang picked the wrong victim. However, what began as a confrontation escalated into something no one anticipated. A redemptive tale that would change the course of events for the hunter and the hunted. Read this amazing real story to see how the patience of one man turned a band of vicious bikers into heroes who now defend the town they once ravaged. Post a comment telling us from what part of the globe you're tuning in. Also, please subscribe if you found this article motivating. You won't believe tomorrow's story until you stay tuned. Ethan Mason toiled in his organic farm fields before the sun had even risen above the faraway hills. Checking irrigation lines with the same exactitude he formerly used to inspect tactical gear, his sturdy frame moved with calm efficiency across the rows of vegetables, even though he was 42 years old. Starting early, staying vigilant, and checking every detail were skills he had honed during his 20 years as a naval SEAL. "Greetings, Ethan," the field was greeted by the familiar voice of Grace Wilson. The old woman approached him, toting her usual tray of freshly baked muffins and coffee mugs. "I was wondering whether you were going to be hungry for breakfast. Yet again, you've been out here since before the sun came up." Ethan stood taller, his palms drying on his faded jeans. "Grace, I am being spoiled by you." They were muffins that Sarah would have adored. When he thought about his late wife, his voice lowered. "It seems like someone needs to watch out for you. I must protect you from your mother's wrath." After placing the basket on a nearby work table, Grace set it down. "By the way, no one else ever offers to help me tend to my tomato plants. I am the champion of this year's sauce contest." The low growl of motorbikes reverberated throughout the valley as they ate their breakfast. Grace's expression became more worried. "They've returned. Once again this week." Ethan kept his cool and finished his coffee in a systematic fashion. The Iron Fangs are suddenly acting more daring. According to Sheriff Matthew, 3 farms in the neighboring county have been damaged. According to Grace's whispers, they fractured Bob Turner's arm because he refused to pay their protection money. For many years, his family has owned and operated the feed business. Sales are now on his mind. The sound of the motorcycles increased in volume. Assisted by Ethan, Grace was able to gather her belongings. "Get back to your house. I'll see this through." Grace warned Ethan Mason not to be scared by those goons as she ran to her car. 5 motorbikes snarled up the gravel road leading to Mason Farm just as she had begun to back away. Blade Davidson, their leader, wore a striking combination of black leather and steel wolf insignia, creating an intimidating presence. He looked out over the lush fields with a contorted smile on his damaged face. "You have a very nice setup here, farmer." He sounded an alarm, and Blade silenced his engine. Too bad it got lost or damaged. His 4 friends dispersed, trampling plants underfoot. With his hands relaxed at his sides, Ethan stood silently. His posture betrayed his extensive martial experience to anyone with the right eyes. But the bikers saw him as nothing more than a helpless farmer who was about to get his due. Blade went on, wearing heavy gloves, explaining that $5,000 every month ensures the security of your lovely land. Or else he would have knocked over a tray of young tomato plants. Mishaps do occur. "Those tomatoes belonged to Grace's competition," Ethan whispered. Even though he didn't mean any harm, 2 of the motorcyclists exchanged looks at specific points in his voice. Blade was oblivious. The elderly woman's vegetation, oh my. Perhaps it would be a good idea to also visit her. She might make us some delicious muffins, I bet. A small hardening of Ethan's eyes occurred. One final opportunity to depart silently. Things start to get tricky after that. The motorcyclists burst out laughing. With a thick chain in his grasp, Blade encircled his fist. "Here, boys, show Farmer John what happens when humans disrespect the wolf pack." The first to act was a motorcyclist named Bulldog, who swung a lead pipe over Ethan's head. However, Ethan had departed. He skillfully dove out of the way of the assault and stunned Bulldog with a wrist strike, his actions refined by innumerable combat operations. Bulldog joined the pipe as it gasped for air, even before it struck the ground. What on earth? The biggest motorcyclist, Tank, sprinted ahead. The velocity of the tank was diverted into a nearby water trough as Ethan acted like water. Sputtering and startled, the large man surfaced. Anger twisted Blade's features. Get rid of that ghost wrench. With blades out, the two surviving motorcyclists slowly encircled Ethan. They coordinated their attacks in the hopes of overwhelming him. Rather than helping each other, their teamwork backfired as Ethan knocked down the other with one of his momentum. As his men writhed on the floor, Blade gazed in shock. "Farmer, you're dead." He made a lethal arc with his chain. The deftness with which Ethan caught it with a single hand was a testament to his extensive training. That is also the position taken by the Taliban. He pulled Blade off his feet by yanking the chain. That was a mistake. After that, the altercation stopped abruptly. 5 minutes after that, Sheriff Matthews showed up to find 5 infamous Iron Fangs members sitting in Ethan Tomato Field, each of them bound with their own bike chains. "Hey there, Mason." A sigh was emitted by the sheriff. The thrills kept drawing me back, even when I was abroad. Already, Ethan was replanting the tomato seedlings that Grace had planted. Grace and Dave were endangered. I simply could not allow that to remain. It was only the start, though. It was completely unforeseen how this one confrontation would lead to a tale of forgiveness, restoration, and surprising camaraderie. The farmer who had vowed to live his life without violence was about to undertake his greatest quest to yet, a journey that would impact not only him but the entire Willow Ridge community. An extraordinary adventure was about to begin, one that would show that sometimes the best wins aren't won by vanquishing an opponent but by transforming them into an ally. It all began with a modest tomato grower who desired nothing more than to cultivate his crop without interference. Willow Ridge was swept up in the news of the altercation at Mason Farm. When the sun went down, Sheriff Matthews' phone continued to ring non-stop with anxious locals and reporters who wanted to confirm the claims. A farmer ended the horror of 3 counties when he killed 5 members of the gang known as the Iron Fangs. Blade Davidson battled not only physical wounds but also a battered pride while incarcerated in the county jail. Via cell phone, Blade's subordinate Mike Ace Thompson overheard him spitting out commands. "Gather everyone. I would prefer it if that farm was destroyed by fire by dawn." Ace said to Boss, "Maybe we should give this some thought," as he observed the other Iron Fangs congregating at their warehouse hideout. "This farmer doesn't seem right. Am I being interrogated?" The tone of Blade's voice became menacing. "Ugh, that guy really brought the Iron Fangs down. Not many people can say they did that and survived." Deputy Sarah Chin documented the incident through photographs at Mason Farm, while Ethan tended to the aftermath of the altercation. "As soon as word gets out to the other members of the Iron Fangs, Mr. Mason, you must volunteer for protection." "Deputy, I am grateful for your concern." Ethan softly cut in. "Not a problem for me." He proceeded with military precision to replace the seedlings of Grace's damaged tomatoes. Sarah refused to give up. "Excuse me, but I believe there are 20 more gang members in the area. They have a history of responding to insults. As a result of the Miller Farm's refusal to pay protection money, it was burned down last month. Then perhaps someone should confront them." Sarah noted that Ethan's eyes were continually scanning the horizon, evaluating sight lines and possible approach routes, while his voice remained calm. A typical farmer would not act in such a way. Upon returning to the station, Sarah informed Sheriff Matthews of her findings. "Dave, Mason seems strange. He clearly has extensive training, given his movements and the fact that he defeated 5 armed men." As he examined a folder labeled "Classified" on his desk, Matthews let out a sigh. Sarah, it's best to keep some things to yourself. Rest assured, Ethan Mason is not a major concern for us. Even though Ethan begged her to leave the farm that night, Grace would not budge. She adamantly rolled out dough for her renowned pies while sitting at his kitchen table. A threat to my tomatoes from those guys. Plus, someone must watch your food intake. Outside, a truck drew up. Quickly entering the room was Dr. Alice Rivera, the neighborhood vet and closest friend of Ethan's late wife. I recently heard, Ethan. Feeling all right? She looked over him for wounds in a flash. No worries, Alice. Took the day off to take care of the garden. Ethan forced a half grin. Upkeep of outdoor spaces. Everyone in town is raving about how you defeated half of the Iron Fangs by yourself. She spoke more softly. Reports indicate that Blade Davidson is seeking retribution. He is welcome. Ethan, he whispered. However, his tone caused the women to look at each other anxiously. In his own manner, Pastor Dan Mitchell was coping with the aftermath at the community center. For months, members of his congregation had been living in fear as the Iron Fangs demanded security funds from church fundraisers. The local business owners were summoned to an urgent meeting by him. It would be unwise to let Ethan to deal with this on his own, Frank Cooper of the hardware store contended. The Fangs will return armed to the teeth. But then what? In a sling, Bob Turner asked, his fractured arm visible. They are murderers. All we are is farmers and store owners. Pastor Dan appeared deep in thought. Perhaps that has been the issue we've faced throughout. It's just the two of us. Now is the moment for us to unite. The Iron Fangs assembled in large numbers at their storehouse as night fell. As Blade detailed his plot for vengeance, more than 30 motorcycles lined up. Yet, Ace's discomfort persisted. He was familiar with Mason's fighting style from his time in the army. Ghost held up his phone and told Ace to look at this. His investigation into Mason's past has been ongoing. Following his wife's death 2 years ago, Guy relocated here. Acquired the farm through a family member. Wait, what came first? Completely non-existent. He seems to have vanished. Ace's innate sense of duty begged for caution. A better understanding of this farmer is necessary before we take action against him, Blade. We are well informed on all matters. The serpent hissed. We lost him. What happens when you disobey the Iron Fangs? Willow Ridge will see tonight. From his hiding place behind the warehouse, young Tommy Wilson, who was Grace's grandson, watched. With the hope of obtaining information that could assist Ethan, he had pursued the motorcyclists. Upon learning of their intentions, his pulse quickened. However, just as he was about to slink away, a twig broke beneath his foot. To what did that refer? Boom! Went Tank's voice. Verify the outside. As he sprinted, Tommy's shoes crunched under him. Motorcycles started up behind him and roared to life. This was familiar territory for the lad, but the bikes were much quicker. The group was closing in on him, but headlights showed him the way. As Tommy was about to give up, a pickup truck he recognized materialized from a side road. A door for the passenger swung open. Under Ethan's order, go inside. As Ethan flawlessly executed a protective driving move, Tommy leaped into the truck, blinding their pursuers with a cloud of dust. Tommy observed the irate motorcyclists come to a sudden halt in the rearview mirror. If you knew, how? Still feeling his heart race, Tommy let out a gasp. According to Grace, who phoned, you were behaving suspiciously at dinner. Ethan spoke in a steady tone, but he couldn't take his gaze off the mirrors. You showed a lot of courage there, Tommy. Ignorant yet courageous. According to Tommy, they're planning to show up tonight. The farm will be destroyed by all of them. Unsurprised, Ethan gave the signal. Yes, I am aware. I'm counting on you to assist me in ensuring the safety of everyone. Lights began to switch on throughout the town as news of the approaching confrontation spread, and the truck veered toward it. An unforgettable night was about to unfold in Willow Ridge. Not the possibility of an attack by the Iron Fangs, but the ability of a single ex-Navy SEAL to defend a whole town from their wrath was at stake. Little did anybody know, this night would be the catalyst for events that would shape Willow Ridge into something more formidable than anyone had ever imagined. Defending a farm wasn't even close to the true fight. It centered on rescuing a community's spirit. As Ethan spoke to the assembled locals, the ancient church basement buzzed with anxious energy. With his deputies arranged around the premises, Sheriff Matthews stood by the door. The faraway sound of motorbike's engine rumble intensified outside. Ethan ordered everyone to remain in this area until it was over in a voice that exuded subtle authority. Your safety is guaranteed by Sheriff Matthews and Deputy Chen. But it's your farm, Frank Cooper argued, warning that the land would be burned. The culmination of all your efforts. Ethan said that structures can be reconstructed. Fate cannot be saved. His gaze locked with Grace's resolute expression. No need to argue, Grace. I am the same way. Grace stood up and said, fuck that. Allowing you to confront this on your own would lead to Sarah's unforgiveness. Plus, there are freshly baked pies in your oven. Almost a grin flashed across Ethan's face. We won't rush the pies. Grace said with conviction that those weren't for her. Even the most vicious individuals get hungry after a good battle. A warm slice of pie can sometimes be the greatest way to end a war. In the lead, we had Dr. Alice Rivera. Here I am establishing a medical station. Do your best to not overload me, alright? Just as Ethan was about to leave, Tommy Wilson burst into the room. I can lend you a hand. Where did they hide their spare gas tanks? I know. I caught a glimpse of them throughout my adventure. You have been really helpful. Ethan interrupted him politely, though. You must now ensure the safety of your grandma. Sitting still is bravery personified at times. Ethan was seized by Sheriff Matthews as they stood outside. Do you have any doubts? Within the next hour, I may arrive with the state's finest security forces. In response, Ethan checked his watch and said that it was an hour too long. Plus, Dave, this must conclude this evening. For far too long, these folks have known nothing but terror. Reluctantly, the sheriff gave a nod. I thought we were finally done when you moved back here. Indeed, I did the same. Ethan glanced up at the sky as it began to darken. We don't always get to pick our fights. Their choice is us. Ethan was meticulous and worked fast when he was back at Mason Farm. His getting ready could have seemed weird to anyone looking. He wasn't erecting barriers or boarded up windows. On the contrary, he appeared to be randomly arranging agricultural machinery, tweaking irrigation systems, and setting up work lights. At the same time, the Iron Fangs assembled at their designated staging spot. At 35 strong, Blade's assembled force was the biggest gathering of the gang in years. According to Blade, who spoke over the thundering motors, this will conclude tonight. We were made to look weak and degraded by Mason. Once we finish clearing out his land, nobody will dare oppose the Iron Fangs. However, something seemed off to Ace. Some of the veterans were uneasy, but their most aggressive members cheered. It was a familiar expression. He had seen it many of times in the reflection. Those were the features of men who had witnessed more bloodshed than they could handle. Blade gave the command for Ghost Tank to approach from the east. The Bulldog squad is making waves out west. I would like that area to be encircled. Ace spoke out, boss. There seems to be an issue. My sources indicate that Mason is still present, despite having hours to get out. Blade grinned, happy. Facilitates it. With his military instincts blaring, Ace adamantly refused. This raises suspicions. Nobody remains to confront 35 armed men on their own. In an instant, Blade reached out and grabbed Ace's collar. "Again, you're interrogating me." "I'm trying to keep us alive," Ace shot back. "Blade, I served you. What Mason did, how he set us up, was exactly right. He is more than just a farmer." Blade angrily stated that it didn't matter if he was goddamn Superman. The bikers screamed into the night, dividing into their own groups, and tonight he is dead. With his binoculars, Ace remained reticent. There has been a shift in the arrangement of the farm. There were peculiar shadows cast by the work lights, and the tools were nowhere to be found from earlier. In the church, Tommy was unable to remain motionless. "It is our duty to lend him a hand." Grace reached out and touched his shoulder. "Little one, observe and absorb." On occasion, the most subdued individuals posed the greatest threat. The deputy's expression turned frowny as she scowled at her radio. "Reports indicate that the Iron Fangs warehouse has been the site of explosions, Sheriff. According to Matthews, that is not feasible. They are en route to Mason's property with all of their men." "Not all of them," Tommy said with a smile. "I may have told one farmer where they store their fuel." Ethan listened in his barn, which was darkened, as the motorcyclists approached back at the farm. He was inspecting machinery that had nothing to do with farming as his hands moved mechanically. He still possessed the skeletal memories of his time spent as a SEAL. The initial group of motorcyclists collided with the rearranged irrigation pipes, their bikes sliding in the muck. Ethan was able to remain hidden by using the carefully positioned work lights, which blocked their night vision yet cast long shadows. Dispersed, Blade's voice cut through the din of chaos. "Track him down." However, Ethan was already in motion, appearing as a shadow amid others. A mysterious assailant was gradually disarming and incapacitating the motorcyclists. "I have extensive understanding of the farm's layout in addition to years of experience in special operations." "He's tearing us to shreds," someone yelled out. From his vantage point on the road, Ace noticed the pattern. "Uncle of A. Tactical sweep formations are being used by him. The guy is in the military." An angry Blade snatched a gas can. "Pound it. Let all burn." Unfortunately, the can was full of water when he attempted to sprinkle gasoline on the barn. The explosion in the warehouse had wiped out all of their gasoline supplies. In search of this? Emerging from the shadows, Ethan raised a gas cap and called out. "Keep your supply lines protected at all times." Mistake in basic strategy. Blade whirled around and shot his gun aimlessly. Ethan was there in an instant, disarming him with the ease of a pro after the shot missed. With his arm pinned behind him, Blade was face down in the muck. "Are you aware of the most significant error you made?" Ethan spoke softly. "The protection racket, not this one. Endangering my farm in no way." Grace felt threatened by it. Each week, she bakes pies to donate to the VA hospital. You may have even had a few of your own guys with them. Less than 20 minutes later, the battle was ended. Sheriff Matthews discovered 23 motorcyclists restrained and seated silently in the barn upon his arrival. All were treated for minor injuries sustained while receiving nursing care. Dozens more had slipped into the darkness. However, the events that followed would irrevocably alter Willow Ridge. The ensnared Iron Fangs sat in strange stillness inside the barn's cozy lighting. Their energy for the battle had faded. A blend of hay, motor oil, and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Ethan interacted with them in a very different capacity than that of a captor. They suddenly asked them questions, checked on their wounds, and offered drinks. "Been a part of the 75th Regiment, were you?" Noticing a faded tattoo on one of the younger members, Ethan decided to ask. After 2 tours in Afghanistan, the motorcyclist snapped his head up. "You did what?" "You could tell you were a ranger by the way you fought." A mug of coffee was presented to him by Ethan. "The city of Kandahar. The region of Helmand. As Ethan counted the number of veterans among the detained bikers, similar discussions began to take place around the barn. 8 in all, including Ace, who observed the conversations with increasing comprehension. Ace finally brought it up, "You're not your average farmer. SEAL tactics are in play here, with the field serving as a kill zone, lights as a source of confusion, and the disruption of supply lines." Whispers ceased in the barn. Blade, who was still restrained but was now perched on a bale of hay, abruptly lifted his head. "Excuse me." Ethan gave the group serious thought for a while. "Protect Team 6. Left the position 20 years ago as Master Chief." "Complete nonsense." Blade gargled, although his tone faltered. A number of the more seasoned members immediately straightened up, their military posture returning without conscious effort. "Continue checking his move against the tank," Ace said. "We were completely outclassed by his utilization of the terrain and the SEAL takedown method." Ignoring Ethan's irate expression, Grace opted to enter the barn at that very time. With her, she dragged a big wicker basket lined with checkered fabric. "I brought pie in case you guys get tired of attempting to torch my friend's farm." What a ridiculous moment. Captured gang members' stress was relieved when their granny offered them pie. Some motorcyclists even found it funny. "Grace," Ethan began. "Leave it be for the moment." She interrupted him. "According to Sarah, if no one reminded you to eat, you would forget." Then she started handing out paper plates. "Plus, according to my grandchild Tommy, a few of these lads are veterans. Under my supervision, no veteran will go hungry." Several motorcyclists shifted uncomfortably at the mere mention of Tommy, as they recalled earlier pursuing the child. Though Grace pretended to be a church party hostess offering pie. An elderly motorcyclist named Mrs. Wilson raised her voice. "We apologize for the earlier. My pie is a great way to start making up with your grandchild." Grace gave a forceful response. "Who would like coffee now?" When Sheriff Matthews arrived, he discovered a bizarre sight. Ethan and Ace spoke about their experiences in Afghanistan while the bikers ate pie. Jim summoned Dave and invited him over. "I believe we could find an alternative to putting more people in your prison system. Pay attention." Among the group, Ethan signaled to the veterans. "Deep down, these men aren't bad guys. They are fighters who strayed from the path. Discovered an incorrect form of fraternity." Ace gave a slow nod. The ferocious canines. Having each other's support was the intended theme. It turned into an exercise in terror and intimidation at some point while Blade was in charge. "Is that so?" "The whole group?" Matthews inquired. The seasoned motorcyclists nodded in unison. Many of the newcomers appeared to be giving serious consideration. "They hold empty pie plates." Continued by Ethan was his proposal. "I am presenting a chance to those who are willing to change and seek a better way. Help is needed on the farm. In addition, I am aware of additional veterinarians who are in need of assistance. Individuals who can empathize with your situation." The serpent scowled angrily. "It's insane to think that way. Quiet down, serpent." Someone slashed him off. "Just be quiet for a change." To Ethan, he turned. "Just what is it that you're selling?" "A set of instructions. Half job, half treatment. In any case, the VA has been nagging me to start one. What you attempted to ruin tonight can be rebuilt with your aid. Find a better use for your brotherhood, get some agricultural skills, and maybe even seek some treatment." The deputy, who had been watching in silence, finally spoke up. "We could incorporate it into a rehabilitation program, Sheriff. Versus sentencing. Those who finish it will have their records cleared." Both Matthews and the other person gave a nod. "Some people just don't." As soon as he heard the news, the young ranger joined. Numerous others started to nod in agreement. What a bunch of wimps. Even with his hands tied behind his back, Blade attempted to stand. There is no rehabilitation group like the Iron Fangs. Not at all, Ace was in agreement. Brotherhood is meant to define us, but we've lost sight of that. He turned to Ethan. This offer could be useful to other veterinarians as well, so please consider it seriously. Men who are almost in love with us but haven't quite made the leap just yet. On his way to assess the wounded motorcyclists, Dr. Rivera arrived. She spoke softly to Ethan. This would make Sarah proud. That is precisely her course of action. Ethan hesitated when his late wife was brought up. In Sarah's mind, second chances were always worth taking. That's why she backed his plan to transform the property into a therapeutic center. The night progressed, and ideas started to form. Deputy Matthews contacted the district attorney's office. Dr. Rivera volunteered to work with counselors from the VA. As if it were second nature, Grace continued ladling out coffee and pies. All 8 of the Iron Fangs veterans, a total of 13 men, had taken Ethan up on his offer by morning. The bulk of the group had other plans, but Blade and his most ardent supporters would be facing charges. We really need a new moniker, Ace remarked as the sun came up. We must adjust if we want to retain Iron Fangs. In spite of his grandmother's objections, Tommy secretly returned to the property and proposed the idea of the Garden Warriors. Despite their protests, the ex-motorcyclists had grins on their faces. Over the course of that all-nighter in the barn, something had changed. The pie from Grace and the silent understanding from Ethan were the seeds that would eventually grow into a new sort of brotherhood. No one could have foreseen the profound impact that this peculiar evening would have on their lives or the lives of the entire Willow Ridge community. The anticipated conflict had transformed into something much more formidable. A second opportunity. Rumbling motorbikes shattered the early silence, 1 week following the altercation at Mason Farm. However, their purpose this time around was to construct rather than demolish. With their bikes shining in the early sun, Ace guided a group of 12 ex-Iron Fangs up the gravel drive. I still can't believe we're doing this, Tank said, appearing uneasy in his absence of his signature leather vest. As he beheld the charred remnants of their former warehouse, Ghost reminded him that it was better than jail. In any case, following Blade's demise, word got about that he and his devoted followers had attempted to surprise Ethan in the neighborhood cafe 2 days subsequent to the barn event. Fight ended after precisely 23 seconds. As Ethan collected himself to finish his coffee, Blade suffered a fractured arm and received a 5-year prison term. Ethan stood calmly yet vigilantly near the barn, ready to go. So happy you succeeded. Assuming everyone had breakfast. This is going to be a long day. These were sent to us by Grace. Ace raised a tray of muffins. Mentioned the importance of providing healthy nourishment for growing boys. Without a doubt, she did. Ethan faintly grinned. The damaged fields must be cleared first. Your bikes ripped up a lot of dirt. Despite the difficulty of the task, the soldiers persevered. They had anticipated severe punishment and tough discipline. Rather, they stumbled across an unexpected discovery. With due regard. Ethan did his best to work with them, guiding and instructing instead than dictating. Take a look at these fruit trees. Ethan showed how to replant correctly. Everything is revealed via the roots. You need to be able to interpret the indications and get to the bottom of things, just like in battle. Midway through the morning, Dr. Alice Rivera showed up to the converted barn office to arrange for the initial therapy appointment. Rank them in order of priority. Clipboard in hand, she inquired. Ace took the initiative after exchanging anxious looks with the other males. I suppose that defines who I am. Set a good example, wouldn't you say? Deputy Chen's patrol cruiser showed up just as Ace slipped into the office. For the rehabilitation program, she had been designated as the liaison. Hey, how's everything doing? Ethan said, better than expected, as he watched Tank demonstrate to Tommy how to measure the pH of soil. Essentially, they were fighters who only needed a fresh objective. At about midday, the local news crews arrived, captivated by the peculiar sight of formerly incarcerated individuals tending to a farm. Ethan kept his distance, but he did let them take a couple pictures. He told the press with conviction that these men need privacy as they try to put their lives back together. Thanks to his congregation, Pastor Dan brought lunch with him when he arrived. He made the announcement after the church council had voted unanimously in favor of the program. For veterans in need of accommodation, we are transforming the former youth center into a dormitory. The change went beyond the physical. There were tales that emerged while the guys farmed the land. Before his PTSD led him to the gang, Ghost worked as a battlefield doctor. After 3 tours of duty left Tank ill-equipped to adapt to civilian life, he lost his family in a divorce. They had all looked to the Iron Fangs for camaraderie, but their use of force and threats had only provided them with short-term solace. "It's peculiar," Ace remarked while taking a drink of water. "Thought we were free as gang members, but in reality, we were merely constructing yet another jail." Frank Cooper, a hardware store employee, showed up that afternoon with some donated equipment. He informed Ethan that the locals are discussing your activities here. "Does anybody here know how to fix things?" That's what Bob Turner is asking. He need assistance with his garage. We started to get more visitors from the neighborhood. Maria Gonzalez brought homemade tamales. Her farm had been a target of the Iron Fangs once. Declaring her intention to set up an impromptu feast in the barn, she recalled her father's advice that men who are hungry cannot think clearly. The former motorcyclists were perplexed by the level of acceptance. No one had anticipated hostility and terror, much less offers of free meals and jobs. Why are they acting in this way? Understatedly, Ghost spoke to Ethan. In response, Ethan stated that this is the essence of community. "I felt better after returning to this village for my final visit. It is now up to you." Grace and the sheriff's wife, Helen Matthews, showed up with further pies as night fell. Helen said that the ladies' auxiliary wanted to lend a hand. "The veteran housing program will be the beneficiary of our upcoming event." Sheriff Matthews expressed his surprise at witnessing his wife discussing her renowned peach cobbler with former gang members. "I never thought I'd see the day," he said. "Ethan, are you certain about everything? Those guys aren't terrible, Dave." Simply became disoriented. Reflecting on his personal challenges following the SEAL's removal, Ethan hesitated. Returning home from a battle can be the most difficult part. Intent, the sheriff gave a nod. Next week is the commencement of Blade's trial. Serious trouble is on the horizon for his die-hard fans. The district attorneys, however, have agreed to consider alternative punishment for program graduates. The guys got ready to go as the sun went down. Unexpectedly, they had achieved more in a single day. First counseling sessions were finished, damaged fields were cleaned, and new seedlings were planted. Ace remarked, "Same time tomorrow," as he wiped perspiration off his face. "At first light, you will find Ethan here. Tell the others who are still on the fence about it, Ace. Help is available if they desire it." Ethan and Grace ate the remaining pie while sitting on their porch that night after everyone else had left. Subtly, Grace remarked that Sarah would be very proud. She had this dream as well, didn't she? Turning the farm into a therapeutic haven. Looking out across the fields, Ethan nodded. It was there that their erstwhile adversaries had spent the day learning to build instead of destroy. She insisted that second chances should be extended to everyone. So, Grace got to her feet and gathered up all of her empty pie pans. "In my opinion, you've made a solid beginning. Those boys bring back a flood of memories of your first days home. Feeling disoriented, furious, and longing for direction. Ethan stated that these folks are good. Someone should kindly remind them of that." Ethan looked down at his phone as Grace drove away. By text, 3 other ex-Iron Fangs had expressed interest in participating. 2 of them were being hired at Bob Turner's garage, according to a message he sent. A shift has begun to take place. All they needed was some time to mature. Challenge came in the shape of 20 rumbling motorbikes crashing into Willow Ridge 2 weeks into the rehabilitation program. A rival gang from the neighboring state, the Death Riders, had learned of the Iron Fangs' apparent vulnerability. On his way to lecture a group of veterans about irrigation systems, Ethan was interrupted by Ace's rapid approach to the farm. There are issues. Large ones. Death Riders? Ethan remarked in a calm manner, but he was already looking over the horizon. At this very moment, they are posing a threat to Tank and Ghost at Bob's garage. Our management change became public knowledge. Ethan used a towel to dry his hands. Hurry up and return everyone to the farm. Tank and Ghost were confronted by the towering figure known as Crusher, commander of the Death Riders, at Bob Turner's garage. There, for the past 7 days, the two ex-Iron Fangs had been doing lawful duties. Crusher scowled at you as well, pretending to be a mechanic and collecting honest wages. The Fangs transformed into pups made of steel. Crusher, Tank warned you to stay out of it. We've had enough of that existence. No one is finished until we declare them to be. A tool wagon was knocked over by Crusher. You are still responsible for paying us the protection money from his agreements, even though Blade is in jail. With his previously fractured arm still slightly immobilized in a brace, Bob Turner emerged from his office. I own this land. Flee the scene before I notify the authorities. Then Crusher let out a laugh. Grandpa, feel free to call anybody you like. Whispers from behind them carried Ethan's assurance that they would be here by the time they arrived. Ethan, Sheriff Matthews, and Deputy Chen were standing there as the Death Riders turned to see them. Additional townies and ex-Iron Fangs were being pulled up in cars and trucks behind them. You have no place being involved in this, Farmer, Crusher scowled. And Ethan took a step forward to confirm it. These guys are Bob's employees. Bob is someone your friend knows. Thus, it becomes my concern. At his gang, Crusher cast a glance around. One of you out of 20. Those odds appeal to me. Sheriff Matthews made the quip, you might want to check your math, as other vehicles pulled up. Dozens of locals and a few ex-Iron Fangs program participants were assembling at the site. Grace, with her trusty wooden spoon in hand, was also present. Is this why you parted ways with the Iron Fangs? Stoner made fun of Tank and Ghost. Assisting a hometown hero in a game of farming? Stand up straighter, Tank said no. We departed because we discovered an alternative to fear. Our lives were given meaning. And community, Ghost chimed in as he stepped forward to stand by Ethan's side. Crane's expression turned gloomy. Every one of you has died. He tucked his hand under his coat. The events that followed went down in Willow Ridge lore. Ethan, known for his famous liquid speed among the SEALs, moved before Crusher could even draw his weapon. After losing his weapon, the enormous motorcyclist collapsed to the ground in a heap. Our conversation will be civilized about territory and respect, Ethan remarked in a conversational tone while retaining his grip on Crusher. The assassins hesitated as Sheriff Matthews' deputies retreated from their hiding places, their rifles drawn. Even more crucially, they were encircled by reformed bikers and resolute citizens who were standing shoulder to shoulder with them. Listen to this, Ethan said, his voice soothing to everybody. There is more to Willow Ridge than meets the eye. Your protection racket isn't targeting these individuals. They're like family to me and my buddies. With a sharp shave, our family moved forward. As before, the other wolf packs gave the signal. So now you're faced with a decision, Ethan continued. Give it a go and get the word out. You are not allowed in Willow Ridge. Or he might have used a little more force, causing Crusher to gasp. We can carry on with this conversation at the sheriff's office. The decision is yours. Nobody budged for an anxious second. Afterwards, one of the authors of the death penalty went on a ride. Others swiftly followed suit. After a short while, Ethan had pinned Crusher and only he remained. I understand. An exhalation of breath was made by Crusher. We've left. I will give you Willow Ridge. No, Ethan clarified, assisting him while keeping a tight hold on him. Whoever lives in Willow Ridge is a part of it. Keep it in mind. Bob Turner went up to Tank and Ghost as the Riders of Doom withdrew. That lunch break was definitely action-packed, guys. And now we get to the transmission that you were repairing. The anxiety was released by the nonchalant return to normalcy. As the gathering dispersed, several made their way to Grace's residence. She had announced a last-minute dinner party. As the sun went down, the barn on the property was full. During Dr. Rivera's group therapy session, former foes sat down and shared Grace's cuisine. Some of the veterans were deeply disturbed by the presence of the Death Rider, which brought up painful memories. After nearly reaching for a firearm, Ghost confessed during the session. It came from the gut. Ethan, though, informed him that he hadn't. So you went in a different direction. To me, that is paramount. As she savored Grace's pie, Sheriff Matthews drew Ethan aside. Your program is getting the word out. 3 additional counties contacted me to inquire about the process of setting up a comparable system. Ethan asserted that the program was not his. This is everyone's property. The actual labor is being done by these individuals and this town. Ethan peered around the barn and noticed Tank instructing Tommy on motorcycle maintenance under Grace's watchful eye. While chatting with Bob Turner, Ace outlined plans for a security firm to be operated by veterans. Pastor Dan and Maria Gonzalez were planning a community garden. As they joined them, Deputy Chen made a comment. I was impressed when you defeated Blade and the Iron Fangs. But this, she pointed to the situation there in front of them. Here we have the true triumph. Ethan sat on the stairs of his porch late that night, after everyone else had gone home. Something significant had been proven in the confrontation with the Death Authors. These folks had undergone genuine transformations. They had opted for their new community instead of their old ways when tested. Ace stepped out of the shadows and sat down next to him. Very eventful day. Ethan admitted that things may have turned out terribly. However, it failed because you demonstrated that we should not fight for ourselves alone. Ace froze. It was the other people's wish that I inquire with you. Our group's name has been up for discussion. Ace made the announcement at the meeting the following morning to the Valley Guardians. Mason Farms Barn has become the de facto meeting place for the erstwhile Iron Fangs. That is the name we would like to give ourselves. As they celebrated their new identity, Ethan observed from a distance and saw the joy on their faces. After stripping off their previous Iron Fangs patches, the men wore plain black vests. According to Tank, there should be no ostentatious logos. All symbols are safe. What we have here are the words, Valley Guardians, and some wheat. Just when we needed a place to call home, this valley provided us with one. Deputy Chen, who was there for the announcement, gave a thumbs up. Thus, it is final. It will be officially recognized by the state after I register it. More than just names were changed. 4 additional veterans were employed by Bob Turner at his garage. 2 others were being instructed by Maria Gonzalez in the ways of organic gardening. A hardware store owner named Frank Cooper had even taken in a couple. Ethan, do you have an issue? Sheriff Matthews showed up, appearing worried. Do you recall the 3 counties that expressed interest in replicating your program? They're dispatching soldiers. Lots of people are here today. For how many? There are 5 sheriff's departments, a dozen social workers, representatives from the VA, and... Matthews paused. Roughly 30 gang members who are interested in going to rehab. Your dealings with the Death Riders became public knowledge. Then Ethan massaged his temples. Our existing program is already cramped. Matthews went on to say that was not all. Word has also spread through the media. The focus here is on national networks. It was as if the sound of approaching cars was a cue. As they peered out the barn door, they beheld a procession of vehicles making their way to the property. Following closely after were news vans, their satellite dishes clearly visible from a distance. Just then, Grace showed up with a basket full of muffins. Lucky I baked a little more. The hours that followed were a complete and utter disaster. Concerned law enforcement officers from adjacent counties sought information regarding safety measures. As far as counseling techniques, social professionals were interested. Reps from the VA met to discuss potential sources of funding. And the news outlets were keen on filming every detail. More intriguing, though, was the arrival of the remaining gang members. Diverse groups comprised them. Some were previous Iron Fangs allies, some were rivals. Everyone was eager to experience Willow Ridge's miraculous turnaround for themselves. Ace informed Ethan, "It's just like you said," as they observed the newcomers. Those warriors who had wandered off course only needed a compass. In the main field, Ethan rounded up all of his followers. There were now more than 100 people in the gathering. There was a mingling of government officials, journalists, interested citizens, and ex-gang members. Ethan spoke directly to them, "Just so we're clear. You won't get out of your legal problems any easier or faster with this. This is a labor-intensive process. It's all about starting over. Everything from farms to enterprises to people's lives." The Valley Guardians were signaled by him. A shift was made by these men. They put in constant effort to regain confidence. During treatment, they confront their traumas head-on. They get fresh abilities. Locals benefit from their efforts. There is an alternative if you are not prepared to make that kind of commitment. No one departed. At that very moment, Ethan went on. "First things first, please excuse everyone who is here with a camera. As they begin to put their lives back together, these men deserve space." The press was forcefully led to the property line despite their protests by Sheriff Matthews and his deputies. A newsman made an effort to argue on behalf of the public interest. Ethan informed him that the focus of the public should be on effective rehabilitation rather than reality television. They require time and space to recover. After the shutterbugs rolled, the serious labor started. Intake interviews were organized by Dr. Rivera and the other counselors. Pastor Dan worked on housing matters in coordination with churches in neighboring counties. Frank Cooper and Bob Turner discussed vocational education and training. As the newcomers arrived, the Valley Guardians stepped in to show them around and explain the program. Their life stories shaped them into ideal role models. "Do you see that field?" Tank shared the news with a gathering. "Only a week ago, it was filth. Tomatoes are the new crop. This is their specialty. Restores life to decaying objects." A large welcoming feast was planned by Grace, Helen Matthews, and other local officials. It was moving to see formerly incarcerated persons eating lunch with police and community members. Deputy Chen confessed, "I never expected to see something like this," as he observed a reunion of feuding parties arranging their tables. In the twilight hours, Ethan and Ace shared some peaceful time together. "Do you understand what this implies? We will require additional room and supplies." With a smile, Ace looked around. "Taken care of." A vote was taken by the Valley Guardians. "We're giving away all of our confiscated property. The program's expansion requires money, properties, and everything else." According to Ethan, that's a lot of money. "It was blood money," Ace said. Finally, it did something useful. The remaining few met in the barn later that evening, after the most had departed. Plans, housing developments, training programs, and counseling sessions were all neatly organized on flip boards. "Look at the blueprints," Ghost remarked, "it's expanding beyond us." In response, Ethan emphasized his point. When we assist one individual, they often go on to assist others. The day's silent observer, Tommy, finally spoke up. Did you get the meaning of this? Like you helped us, the Valley Guardians may be helping people all across the world. They looked at each other. Word of their redemption began to spread, guiding others to a place of restoration. It had an impact. Do one thing at a time, Ethan warned. We must ensure that these new arrivals are treated properly first and foremost. Grace removed the final pie from the oven. Then I guess it's time to go going. I pray that you all are prepared for the long days that lie ahead. Plans were made as they split the pie. Tasks given. There was more to the Valley Guardians than a loose confederation of ex-riders. Something greater was taking shape of them. An example of transformation. A guiding light for those who are also lost. The belief in second chances held by one former SEAL was the catalyst for it all. Blade Davidson's study was winding down, 3 months after the program's expansion. Since Ethan's testimony was pivotal to the prosecution's case, the courtroom was jam-packed as he took the stand. The prosecutor's case started with Mr. Mason. Testimony on your contacts with the accused and the Iron Fangs is requested. From the defendant's table, Blade sent a sneer, but Ethan kept his cool. They showed up at my farm and demanded payment for protection. They threatened physical force when I declined. And you, a mere farmer, were able to overcome a group of armed assailants. Blade and Ethan locked gaze. Retired Master Chief of the Navy SEALs here. The situation was everything but straightforward. The courtroom was thrown into chaos by the revelation. Blade's complexion turned pallid as the court was given a concise synopsis of 20 years of clandestine operations. Once they were subdued, the prosecutor went on. To individuals who were ready to change, you extended an offer of rehabilitation rather than prosecution. Yes. I was able to discern their true nature. Disappearing fighters in search of fresh purpose. Despite Blade's lawyer's best efforts, video from several phones captured the events of that night and disproved Ethan's account. Ethan said little more than, they chose to leave peacefully, when questioned about the Death Riders incident. The expansion got underway at Mason Farm once again. With their surrendered assets, the Valley Guardians had bought nearby homes. 50 veterans in recovery were accommodated in new dormitories. Every day, counseling clinics and training institutions ran. Ace informed Ethan upon his return from court that there were issues at the Northfield. The newcomers fought. Gang feuds from the past are dying out. After Ethan arrived, he saw Tank and Ghost had already separated 2 factions of ex-enemies. So, you're looking for a fight? Tank, he said. Then go ahead and direct it correctly. They had put up a boxing ring, he said. There, supervised, with gloves on. Either that or the program will not continue with you. The guys appeared embarrassed. Someone spoke out. 2 years ago, they murdered my friend. Did you also murder any of their friends? Silently, Ghost inquired. Everyone here has blood on their hands. The question is, are you planning to pile it on or remove it? Anger subsided. Gradually, members of the group dispersed, each going to their assigned tasks. Good handling, Ethan remarked to Ghost and Tank. This is becoming easier for you. Got my education from the top, Ghost said. What the VA has to say about education is worth mentioning. Our program has been formally recognized. My goal is to make it a national model. Collaborating with counselors from 3 counties, Dr. Rivera was situated inside the main barn, which had been transformed into an administrative center. She said that the trauma-informed approach is effective. They find purpose in their healing process when they combine treatment with physical work. News of Pastor Dan's most recent outreach to the neighborhood was brought to his arrival. Both the corporate groups and 4 other churches are interested in sponsoring rehabilitation programs and increasing the number of employment placements. The Valley Guardians were now considered indispensable members of the town. In the case of a natural disaster, they maintained an emergency response team and ensured the safety of local events and the homes of the elderly. Do you recall the days when we would terrorize locations such as these? Ace thought about lunch. We are now safeguarding them. Some shocking numbers were revealed by Deputy Chen, who was reporting from the sheriff's office. Down 60% in 3 counties for crime. Other gangs are either seeking rehabilitation or are considering quitting. The entire area is being transformed by you. However, with success came new difficulties. Ethan convened a meeting of the immediate sort that night. In the barn, there was a conglomeration of officials from the Valley Guardians, local government, the VA, and the police. We're in a sticky situation, Ethan started. Quickly disseminating information. The number of requests is outpacing our capacity, and there are others attempting to replicate our program without fully comprehending its inner workings. Marshall Matthews gave a subtle nod. 3 alleged rehabilitation centers are actually frauds that prey on families in financial need by utilizing our name. Also, other gangs are acting like they're reforming in order to get information, Ace said. 10 obviously plant-based men had to be turned away last week. According to what Dr. Rivera said, we need structure. Authentic validation, instruction for program managers, and inspection of product excellence. We talked for hours. The program's formalization, training protocols, and verification mechanisms were all part of the original plan. The Valley Guardians would go on to become trainers, passing their knowledge on to other communities on effective gang member rehabilitation programs. Ethan explained that it's about more than just granting individuals second opportunities nowadays. The key is to get it correctly. It only takes one hiccup for all our hard work to be ruined. Tommy, who had essentially taken over the role of official photographer for the show, presented them his most recent work. Community transformation, veterans healing, and the reuniting of former foes. The thing I see, you know. While perusing the images, Grace inquired. Optimism shines through. What these men are doing is more than just changing. Their example is proving that it can be done. Ethan strolled his fields late that night, after everyone had gone. The once silent farm was now a symbol of progress. But he understood that much greater difficulties were ahead, what with Blade's impending imprisonment and the prospect of copycats to their work. He was accompanied on his walk by Ace. Blade's attorney bargained with me and asked if I could testify that you used excessive force. And advised him to push it aside. A fresh code is now available to us. Ace cast his gaze across the lit-up structures that housed ex-gang members attempting to start anew. Everything that we have constructed here is larger than Blade. Beyond our comprehension. Ethan gave a knowing nod. They had sowed the seed of change, and now it had blossomed into something truly extraordinary. They needed to keep an eye on it, give it some TLC, and make sure it spread correctly now. In a low voice, Ethan mentioned that Sarah would have adored this. The farm, she declared over and time again, could cure people. Her accuracy was unnoticed. The sentencing hearing for Blade Davidson was a watershed moment. As he rose to deliver his closing remarks, the entire courtroom went silent. However, he displayed a burning wrath in his eyes rather than regret. Think this is finally over? In a snarl, Blade turned to confront Ethan. Things didn't start with the Death Riders. Even in the shadows, I have pals. Your idyllic farm is about to be attacked. Even when the judge handed down a 15-year term, the harm had already been done. His remarks set in motion a series of circumstances that would put the Valley Guardians' creations to the test. Before the crack of dawn 2 days later, Ethan discovered Ace waiting in his office. Confirmation has been obtained. You can't call Blade's bluff. An army of demon kings is forming. Ethan became more stern. There was no group quite like the Demon Kings. They had ties to other states and operated as an organized crime group. For how many? 100 riders minimum. Even yet, it's far from the worst aspect. Ace offered a document. Our other rehabilitation institutions are also in their sights. Out of the blue. With the help of the Valley Guardians, 5 satellite programs were set up in other counties. Dozens more veterans attempting to start over lived at each facility. In a moment of crisis, Sheriff Matthews convened a conference. Joined by leaders of the Valley Guardians, law enforcement officials from 6 counties swarmed the barn. According to Matthews, intelligence indicates coordinated attacks. Their goal is to dismantle all that you have accomplished. Make it clear that rehabilitation is an impossible ideal. Allow them to come, Tank rumbled. But Ethan put up a hand. What Ethan meant was that this had nothing to do with fighting. We must ensure the preservation of our creations. With their second opportunities, these men put their faith in us. Their expectations will be met. As a result, Dr. Rivera spoke up. Around the country, 87 veterans are now participating in rehabilitation programs. Resilience is an ongoing challenge for many. Controversy has the potential to derail months of treatment. Deputy Chen also mentioned the community support that would be lost in the event of a war breaking out. With his SEAL experience coming to the forefront, Ethan meticulously examined the tabletop map. The satellite centers must be evacuated. Gather all of them here. Including staff and families, that's more than 200 people, Pastor Dan pointed out. Shall we store them somewhere? Grace said, the church camp, as she stood in the entryway. The heads of the class cocked. Her arrival had gone unnoticed. Currently, it is vacant. We have a robust security setup and plenty of cabins. Frank Cooper volunteered to have his construction crews reinforce it. Acquired all necessary materials and lumber. There was military accuracy in the movement of the Valley Guardians. Community members opened their houses, local businesses donated supplies, and within hours, convoys of vehicles were surreptitiously transporting members of the rehabilitation program. Ethan oversaw operations from the farm, which doubled as their headquarters. As he looked on, he saw old rivals banding together to aid evacuees, secure homes and businesses, and set up communication networks. Breakers and outlaws collaborating is something I never expected to witness. 2 opposing gangs, Ghost said, whose members had both undergone rehabilitation. Ace said that they are no longer considered criminals or breakers. Now they are known as Valley Guardians. By the time night fell, everyone had escaped. A fortified sanctuary had been built out of the former church camp. Boundaries were set by the local police. Patrol routes were established by the Valley Guardians. But Ethan was aware that this was merely the start. He informed the executive team that they will attempt to isolate us. Turn us into the aggressors. Weaken the community's support for us. According to Deputy Chen, who was checking her phone, it has already begun. Rumors are circulating like wildfire on social media. They're making us out to be an enemy gang and accusing us of being the troublemakers. It was time for Ethan to take a stand and reveal our true selves. Operation Community Shield was initiated the following morning by the Valley Guardians. Teams of reformed veterans started offering free security guard services to local companies while wearing their new uniforms. Many others lent a hand to the elderly by fixing up their homes. In underprivileged communities, medical teams provided free health screenings. Their efforts were covered by local media. Feedback from families affected by the program's success was overwhelming. Publicly, their efforts were supported by churches and civic organizations. Can you perceive the result of your actions? While Ethan was watching the news, Grace informed him. You didn't only instruct them in a new style of combat. You showed them a new way of life. However, the Demon Kings were far from done. Across town, 3 flames of questionable origin broke out that night. Dark figures were seen near the school as first responders hurried to deal with them. All was set for the Valley Guardians. Together with the police, groups of reformed veterans stopped the would-be bombers in their track. KS. The footage showing the would-be bombers clearly shows that the Demon Kings intended to harm innocent people. They intend to instill fear in the neighborhood. Make people too afraid to support us, Sheriff Matthews remarked during their evening briefing. After that, we will demonstrate to them the true nature of power. Ethan, the man responded. Ethan stood guard at the farm that night as thunder swept across the valley. I was familiar with the stillness before a tempest. Throughout his years as a SEAL, he had encountered it multiple times. While on patrol, Ace tagged along. When I was a member of the Iron Fangs, I mistakenly believed that physical strength entailed inspiring dread in others. Making them trust you is the key, I see now. As hundreds of headlights converged from all directions, lightning lighted up the valley. It was the arrival of the Demon Kings. The worst of the storm was almost over. Willow Ridge was bathed in an unsettling light from the hundreds of oncoming headlights. As the Demon Kings encircled the area, Ethan observed from his strategic vantage point. They were more numerous than their IQ would have you believe. In the neighborhood of 200 bicycles. Everyone, please check in. Whispering into his radio, Ethan said softly. St. Paul's Camp preserved. Tank informed. Everyone participating in rehabilitation is safe. Covered the town's perimeter. Verified Spectre. Valley guards and police are ready. The community center has been secured. Assistant Chan chimed in. On standby are emergency services. A guy who goes by the name, the Judge, and is the leader of the Demon Kings approached the main entrance of the property. In contrast to Blade's reckless hostility, the Judge exuded an air of clinical coolness. A basic, twisted and fractured scale of justice was the only patch on his leather cut. Hi, Mason. The grounds were shaken by the thunderous voice of the Judge. Prepare to face the consequences. Ethan entered the light by himself. There was no sign of combat readiness behind his relaxed posture. Seems a bit theatrical, doesn't it? Everything we stand for has been undercut by you. Snarling, the Judge transformed fighters into farmers and hunters into prey. No, Ethan responded placidly. I escorted wayward guys back to safety. Substantial contrast. At the Judge's signal, his mounts began a menacing engine revving. One final opportunity. Turn off all of your software. Return our people or face the consequences. Who are you? An eyebrow was arched by Ethan. No, they are not possessions. A better route was chosen by these men. War is the next option you consider. Ethan actually cracked a small smile. My vote goes to this. All throughout the valley, lights suddenly burst into flames. They were encircled, the Demon Kings. Not by the government or the military, but by the people living there. The Valley Guardians were supported by hundreds of townspeople. Routes for escape were barred by farmers on tractors. Obstacles were made by church buses. Workers in the construction industry set up makeshift barriers. You see, Ethan went on, as you were amassing your army. The true meaning of fraternity was being demonstrated to these individuals by us. Dozens of riders, apparently from the Demon Kings, abruptly dismounted, revealing their Valley Guardian uniforms under their gang colors. After coming to terms with the reality, the Judge's eyes widened. They had used rehabilitated individuals to infiltrate his own organization. They choose us, your own people. Ace stepped out of the darkness. Due to the fact that our service is unparalleled. A second chance. The Judge instinctively lunged for a weapon, but Ethan swiftly disarmed him with ease. Not going down. Not in this context. Demon Kings started to lose their hues in greater numbers. They had witnessed the triumphs firsthand. Met the concept of second chances. Involvement in the rehabilitation program was present in some families. They could see the terrifying army crumble right before their eyes. This is the embodiment of true strength. Ethan spoke to the other bikers. Embrace the unknown. No aggressiveness. However, the society. From her perch on the porch, with her trusty basket at her side, Grace's words resounded. Additionally, pie. The best way to deal with change is with pie. Anger subsided. Real laughter erupted from a number of demon kings. The rehabilitation grapevine had spread the word about Grace's renowned pies. According to Ethan, you are given an option. Remain and engage in combat with a whole community that is prepared to protect its own. Or, the Valley Guardians were signaled by him. Join us. Find an improved method. The judge's authority was clearly eroding as he made a final, desperate attempt. Turncoats are considered dead. No hiding from us. Just like you pursued me. A fresh voice emerged. Hawk, Blade's ex-lieutenant who had vanished months earlier, materialized from behind the townsfolk. It's been weeks since I went undercover at your company. Have the proof necessary to bring your entire enterprise to its knees. With a flash disc in his hand, Sheriff Matthews advanced. This includes your ties to 3 separate criminal organizations in different states. People from the FBI are really curious. The judge's complexion turned pale. More and more riders started to change their colors. Put your face to it, Ethan whispered. You have completed your path. Whether or not you can adapt to new circumstances is the sole concern. Everyone in Willow Ridge would be talking about what occurred next for years. At the farm, approximately 150 ex-members of the Demon Kings were waiting in line to turn in their colors and enroll in rehabilitation as the sun rose over the horizon. The criminal empire of the judge and his few devoted minions crumbled under the weight of evidence, leading to their arrest without incident. Tommy caught the exact moment because he was recording it all on his phone. Reconciling over Grace's pie, old rivals. Newcomers are being assisted by townspeople in completing registration applications. Protectors of the valley extend a brotherly welcome to their erstwhile adversaries. This is absolutely insane, Ghost exclaimed as she observed the unfolding events. Just a year ago, we used to terrorize communities similar to this one. We are now standing up for them. Ethan clarified that he was not arguing. Changing not only them but also ourselves along the way. Dr. Rivera grinned as she coordinated the first evaluations for counseling. Did you get the meaning of this? We must procure a more expansive farm. Changed Valley was graced with the rising of the morning sun. The night that was supposed to ruin their work had, in the most profound way, proved it was right. At this point, the Valley Guardians were more than simply a rehabilitation program. A movement, they were. The belief of one former SEAL that even the hardest hearts could change was the catalyst for everything that came after. Mason Farm had changed drastically in the 6 months following the night of the Demon King's fall. Dorms, training centers, and counseling facilities were among the newer structures that littered the enlarged land. The former barn was now a community center, and the walls were adorned with images of successful rehabilitations, showing the transformation from before to after. Incredible as it may seem, it all began with a couple of tomato plants. In the community center, Grace arranged beautiful flowers while thinking. The first formal ceremony for participants in the rehabilitation program to graduate took place today. Ethan, uneasy in his stuffy suit, fiddled with his tie. Sarah used to say that gardens have a tendency to spread beyond their designated areas. The whole country was watching the ceremony. Government officials and representatives from the VA occupied the front seats, while news crews set up outside, still maintaining a polite distance. However, the expressions on the grads' faces told the whole tale. With a tablet in hand, Ace, now the program's chief of security, came up to Ethan. There were 127 graduates today, including 40 ex-Demon Kings, according to the final tally. Ethan wanted to know my job status. Ace smiled, achieving 100% placement. 3 further garages were opened by Bob Turner. A new hardware chain is being established by Frank Cooper. 12 of them are receiving organic farming instruction from Maria Gonzalez, and a few of them are even venturing out on their own. Pastor Dan opened the graduation ceremony by blessing the graduates. Impressive rates of recovery were demonstrated by the psychological evaluations that Dr. Rivera presented. The crime numbers that Sheriff Matthews revealed had other law enforcement personnel frantically taking notes. The speeches given by the graduates, however, were the most moving part. Now dressed sharply in a suit, Tank ascended to the podium. "I used to terrorize individuals just like you a year ago. Being strong in thought means instilling dread in others. Real power, I've come to realize, is assisting others in conquering their fears." After reviving and expanding his medical training, Ghost continued on. "Seeking both camaraderie and violence, we were disoriented. We discovered healing and family instead." They recounted their experiences one by one. Old rivals who were now colleagues, war veterans who had discovered meaning in life despite their ordeals, and men who had made the conscious decision to change their lives for the better. Ethan remained on the sidelines and allowed them to enjoy their moment. Deputy Chen walked over to him, a heavy folder in her hand. Discreetly mentioning the FBI's concluding report regarding the investigation into the Demon King. "We disrupted 11 crime syndicates and obtained 43 convictions. Amazing effort was done by your covert graduates." Ethan responded that all they needed was the correct mission. With Grace's arrival on stage, the ceremony climaxed. The grads straightened up. The woman with the wooden spoon had earned their respect, and they had all learned it. Although many doubted Ethan's program's viability when he first launched it, Grace persisted. "Supposed it's impossible to alter people's fundamental characteristics. They were mistaken, it seems. Only by bringing people's humanity to light can you hope to alter their innate tendencies." To the grads, she made a gesture. "All of you were nourished by me. Seeing you transform from frightened, enraged guys into influential members of the community. Plus, I have news for you, my pies were not responsible for it. I did it. By making the conscious decision to improve upon your performance from day to day." Something out of the ordinary occurred after the applause had grown deafening. With a unified front, the graduates confronted the onlookers. "According to Ace, we have some news to share. In other news, the Valley Guardians are growing. Veterans organizations from 12 different states have contacted us. The idea is that we should assist in the establishment of such programs. As Ghost elaborated, we are opening training centers around the country with the support of the VA, instructing other communities on how to assist their own missing warriors in reuniting with their families." A touch on Ethan's arm was detected. Tommy gestured towards the rear of the room, his new role as official documentary filmmaker for the show. "You won't believe who showed up." At the entrance, guarded by 2 sentinels, stood Blade Davidson. Most people were unaware of his prison-approved visit. His expression was bewilderment and something else entirely. A yearning. Going back to him, Ethan strode. "Seeing you here was a surprise. I had to see it for myself," Blade whispered. "In prison, I overheard rumors. I didn't buy their story." He observed his former gang mates reveling in their fresh starts. "Just how? What was your secret?" "Neither did we." The grads were acknowledged with Ethan's nod. Indeed, they were. Their decision was to alter. "Does it?" Blade paused. "Should I try now? With my situation in mind?" Ethan looked at him intently for a while. "You are aware of our regulations. Confront your mistakes. Regret it. Finish the task. Despite my best efforts. Blade, second chances never expire. But you have to work for them." Since their initial encounter, Blade's normally impenetrable demeanor began to yield. He felt a pang of sadness as he witnessed his old adversaries embrace their fresh starts. One last custom that Grace had begun was performed at the end of the commencement address. Little tomato plants were distributed to all of the graduates. What she told them was that life is like producing tomatoes. Necessitates dexterity, attention, and a little bit of messiness. If done correctly, though, it benefits all parties involved. As the sun dipped below the horizon over Mason Farm, the graduates and their families toasted the occasion. In areas where fighting had previously taken place, children now play. Over dinner, formerly bitter enemies discussed their future plans. Ethan roamed the fields by himself, thinking back on the initial confrontation that set things in motion. A voice, Sarah's, was heard in his thoughts. Sometimes the tiniest seeds sprout into the largest trees. A fresh chapter was about to start. As a national phenomenon, the Valley Guardians had outgrown their hometown status. A nationwide uprising was on the horizon. And it all began with a single ex-SEAL's belief in the transformative potential of second chances. Hosted the National Conference for Veteran Rehabilitation and Community Integration 1 year after the first graduation, Willow Ridge was a remarkable venue. Participants included law enforcement agencies, veterans groups, and former gang members from all throughout the nation. Ethan took his place at the podium in the brand new conference center, which had been transformed from a vacant field a few short months earlier. Greetings and salutations from Mason Farm, he began on. Second Chance Valley, to quote our alums. There was an unusual mix of people in the crowd, including small-town farmers and VA officials as well as repentant gang members and police leaders. They were all in it together to repeat the Valley Guardians' victory. Ace, who is now dressed like the organization's national director, announced that there are Valley Guardian groups in 28 states. With almost 2,000 graduates, an employment rate of 89%, and a recidivism reduction of 72%. Impressive as the numbers were, what really stood out were the personal changes that took place. By now, Tank had become the owner of the biggest veteran-operated car network in 3 different states. Those who had served as combat medics in the past could enroll in Ghost's medical training program. Even while he was still behind bars, Blade Davidson had begun tutoring inmates. Deputy Chen, who was just promoted to captain, spoke on the viewpoints of law enforcement. Something new is happening. Areas that were once controlled by gangs are now becoming safe havens for members of the community. In addition to reducing crime, the Valley Guardians are effectively eliminating it. Dr. Rivera laid out their treatment plan. Addressing trauma while creating purpose is essential in holistic care. These guys don't merely uproot their lives, they construct whole new ones. The community panel, however, provided the most impactful moment. Grace spoke on change while continuing to use her now iconic wooden spoon, even though she has gained national fame. Want to know what we're hiding? Are you here today? She said. Peruse your surroundings. Members of the program built each and every structure here. Reformed hands planted every crop. We offered them more than just guidelines, we gave them a foundation upon which to create a community. At the conference, attendees heard of achievements that, just a year ago, appeared unimaginable. 2 former adversaries were now running thriving businesses side by side. Former community dreadnoughts now commanded their own emergency response units. When people heard the name Valley Guardians, they immediately thought of good change. Ethan discovered Tommy in the media room when he was on break. Now working as a professional photographer who records the development of the software. Tommy excitedly pulled up a series of images to show you something. From their initial encounter with the Iron Fangs to the fateful night of the Death Rider's arrival and the subsequent downfall of the Demon Kings, the visuals presented their story in vivid detail. Above all else, though, they captured the peaceful times. Service members mending old wounds while working fields and learning crafts. Tommy clarified that publishing houses are keen. Would like to write a book detailing the process of creating similar programs. Another update was given by Pastor Dan, who is in charge of the conference's community outreach panel. Churches around the country are stepping up to the plate, forming support networks, and extending their models beyond veteran rehabilitation. The business integration program was provided by Frank Cooper and Bob Turner. When Frank made the announcement, he said that our graduates are being chased by companies. They are turning out to be among the most dependable employees we have ever had. The agricultural training program, which Maria Gonzalez showcased, is currently in partnership with state colleges. From warriors to farmers, she boasted. The very communities they endangered are now being fed by them. The true measure of their progress, though, was the evening session. Operation Hometown Shield is the new nationwide program that the Valley Guardians have introduced. According to ACE, our focus has shifted beyond simply helping folks recover. We're empowering local communities to take care of their own health. No graduate is ever left without a mentor. With each triumph comes a new chapter. From behind the scenes, Ethan observed as his modest concept expanded. Deputy Chen came over to him with a note in her hand. She stated she had recently received this from the Department of Justice. The Valley Guardians aspire to be the gold standard in gang intervention and veteran rehabilitation programs across the country. Ethan retorted that it was irrelevant to them. The focus is on equipping people to assist themselves. As the conference came to a close, a custom was observed. Everyone there was served pie by grace. All their hard work was on display when reformed gang members and police chiefs enjoyed dessert together and shared anecdotes. The original group reassembled in the long-gone barn later that night, when the masses had dispersed. Pictures of their first encounter sat next to pictures of recent commencements. Do you recall when we believed this had nothing to do with preventing a few troublemakers from the area? Ghost pondered. The quotation that Grace used to make them smile was about how sometimes the tiniest seeds can blossom into the tallest trees. As Ethan surveyed his newfound relatives, he felt a surge of emotion. A second chance should be available to everyone. With that simple premise, they built something that was revolutionizing the country. They were already making preparations for the following stage as they ate their final slice of pie. At this point, the Valley Guardians were more than just a show. A movement was taking shape around them. It all began when a former SEAL held on to the belief that people are still capable of having feelings and emotions. Unexpectedly, Ethan received a letter on a brisk autumn morning, 2 years subsequent to their initial encounter at Mason Farm. Blade Davidson was serving his time at the state penitentiary when he received the return address. As Ethan handed the letter to Ace, he stressed how important it was for him to see it. Blade's usual furious tirades were absent from his words. Inmates' transformations, his own sluggish path to knowledge, and his experience seeing the Valley Guardians triumph on prison TV were all topics he covered in his writing. As Blade had written, I am qualified for early release. My experience with the prison rehabilitation program, which I launched in response to what you established, has taught me that I am not deserving of a second opportunity, but... Ace caught Ethan's gaze. Do you have any opinions? My response would have been absolutely not 2 years ago, Ace said. However, he now pointed out the window, where members of the Demon Kings were instructing fresh recruits in farming skills. People evolve. It was us. In the afternoon, Ethan paid a prison visit to Blade. Something more subdued and reflective had taken the place of the bravado that had marked the previous gang leader. Why did you do that? Blade inquired. You could have just cornered us and locked us up that night at the farm. Instead, you extended a hand. For the simple reason that someone else had done it before, Ethan explained. I felt bewildered and furious after my last tour. I was shown an alternate route by Sarah. When she passed away, this community gave me a renewed sense of purpose. At the same time, a fresh problem was brewing on the farm. The news was bad when Captain Chen, formerly Deputy Chen, showed up. Ace was notified by the FBI. Drug lords attempting to reclaim land once held by the Iron Fangs. It has been deemed soft by the Valley Guardians, according to them. The senior Valley Guardians were rounded up by Ace. All the way back to the beginning, there were those like Tank and Ghost. "The people just don't get it," Tank remarked. "We're strong. We're more powerful than before." However, Ghost emphasized that it was an extremely powerful form. "Instead of bringing them down, we strengthen them up." Non-violently, the Valley Guardians rose to the occasion. Before the cartels could recruit them, they reached out to at-risk adolescents, established neighborhood watches, and collaborated with local businesses to enhance security. Upon learning of the danger, Grace did nothing more than ramp up her pie production. She made it clear that she couldn't formulate a sound defense when she was hungry. In search of easy prey, the cartel dispatched scouts. Communities were instead found to be united. Cooperative effort by former adversaries. People from many walks of life, including veterans, shaping something valuable. Did you notice that little one? After a cartel scout was apprehended and summoned to dinner, Ghost pointed out a teenager to him. Naturally, Grace's idea. He was involved in narcotics trafficking 2 years ago. Now he's a college student. Here, that is our specialty. Better options are provided to people. The cartel's covert efforts to expand their territory were unsuccessful. They failed miserably in their attempt to compete with optimism, and not because of any violent means. The hearing for Blade's release had resumed at the prison. In his testimony, Ethan detailed the recovery program run by the Valley Guardians. Other grads shared stories of how they had changed for the better. The improvement that Mr. Davidson has made is very extraordinary. Witnesses included the prison warden. Inmate aggression has decreased by 40% because to his mentoring program. Blade was the last to speak to the board. He said it plainly, "I was mistaken. Regarding all matters. To be strong, I thought, was to inspire dread in others." In their efforts to help others face their concerns, these men demonstrated true strength. Conditions were placed on his release by the board. Under close supervision, Blade would join the Valley Guardians program. Now the man who sought to demolish all they had worked so hard to create would have to pitch in to keep it standing. Instead of animosity, Blade encountered cautious acceptance upon his arrival at Mason Farm. The men he had once led had matured into new leaders, illuminating a different path for him to follow. As a first step, Tank gave him a pair of work gloves and urged him to proceed. "The command from Grace is that you become a tomato farmer." With her basket in hand, Grace herself materialized. "I was waiting for him to show up for a while because these lads required a taste tester for my new recipes." Ethan strolled through his enlarged pastures that night. A vast campus of optimism has developed from a single little farm. Veterans in recovery were housed in dormitories. Learned new abilities in training facilities. Healing previous scars was facilitated by counseling services. Above all else, though, it had become into a family. Dined together, former adversaries. In areas where fighting had previously taken place, children now play. Although it was still present, the past had no say in what would happen next. He was accompanied on his walk by Ace. "Do you recall our conversation on the first night in the barn? Concerning soldiers in need of fresh assignments?" I nodded, "Ethan. Now look at us. Our alums are now leading initiatives in 30 different states. It's going national, Blade's prison program. Not even the cartels have a chance against our construction." They arrived at the historic barn, which serves as a constant reminder of its humble beginnings. Images within conveyed their narrative. Our hardy Iron Fangs. The riders of death. The kings of darkness. Through all of their struggles, they had emerged stronger. By means of change, not coercion. Do you know what Sarah's take on this would be? Ethan spoke softly. Excuse me. She would claim that this is only the beginning. The Valley Guardians celebrated their largest milestone yet, exactly 3 years after the Iron Fangs first rode into Mason Farm. Their approach became the gold standard for gang intervention and veteran care when the president signed the Veterans Rehabilitation and Community Integration Act. Ethan gazed at the wall of success tales while standing in the original barn, which is now a museum of change. A photo of Blade Davidson had just been added. After finishing the program, he oversaw rehabilitation programs at 3 different state prisons. Do you have a problem? Ace jangled his mind. Do you recall Grace's apprehension over those first tomato plants? Those that were vanquished by the Iron Fangs? Where do they stand? The first crop from their offspring is being distributed today. From Grace's initial seeds, 3,000 plants were grown and sent to new rehabilitation institutions across the country. Grace had even created a program to help people get jobs using her famous pie recipes. Now serving 50 cities, baking for Brothers assisted veterans and ex-gang members in starting their own companies. I never imagined my pies would be a part of a national rehabilitation strategy, she said with a laugh as she gave Blade the glaze recipe. A kitchen table, nevertheless, can sometimes be the most restorative place. Nobody could have predicted how far the farm had progressed. 50 acres were devoted to the Valley Guardians Training Academy, where students learned everything from farming to company management. However, the lesson of transformation was the most essential. Here is Tommy's newest creation, which he presented Ethan when he became the official historian of the program. Nearly every police academy and VA clinic in the country was showing a documentary on their ordeal. Their evolution was shown in the footage. Our initial encounter with the vicious Iron Fangs. The night the riders known as Death arrived. The downfall of the monarchs of Hell. The subtle wins, meanwhile, were also highlighted. Return to work, reunited families, and renewed lives. The automotive training program was being run by Tank, who had recently established his 10th garage that was owned and operated by veterans. Here, we fix more than just cars. A fresh batch of trainees was briefed by him. Lives are being improved when we work together. Ex-combat medics now have new opportunities thanks to Ghost's medical training program, which partnered with big hospitals. From community healing to wartime medicine, he stated. Complete reversal. Their business training program has grown into a nationwide network thanks to Bob Turner and Frank Cooper. Frank made it clear at a Chamber of Commerce event that these guys are more than just workers. What real atonement looks like is being demonstrated by them to corporate America. Everything had changed, even the former Iron Fangs warehouse. Currently, it served as the headquarters for the Valley Guardians Emergency Response Center, which coordinated relief efforts in many states. They protected the same villages they had terrorized before, working hand in hand. At a meeting for law enforcement, Captain Chen presented the most recent data. The employment rate for graduates is 92%, while gang activity is reduced by 87%. However, statistics do not reveal the truth. A lot of people are getting well. With Pastor Dan at the helm, thousands of churches around the country were pitching in to help with recovery. He cited the phrase, "faith without works," as an example. These guys are examples of how change may happen in the real world. When it came to treating veterans, Dr. Rivera's trauma therapy program was the gold standard. PTSD is only one of several conditions that we're addressing. She went into detail. When it comes to finding new fights to fight, we're assisting fighters. On the eve before sunset, the farm held a solemn ritual. Those first Iron Fangs who made the decision to transform were passing the torch to the next generation of Valley Guardians. Ace spoke to the assembly. He is currently the national director. Our belief 3 years ago was that being strong meant instilling terror in others. Ethan demonstrated that true strength lies in assisting others in conquering their worries. They saw former members of every major gang among the new bosses. Your enemies include Iron Fangs, Death Riders, and Demon Kings. On a mission of self-improvement, former adversaries have come together. Recalling Sarah's comments regarding the healing power of the farm, Ethan observed from behind. At times like these, when people's lives were redeemed, he could feel her presence. In his business casual dress, Blade approached him, appearing different. "You kept believing in us even when we doubted ourselves, and for that I am eternally grateful." Perched atop her basket, Grace materialized precisely as expected. Her admonition was to eat more and talk less. It's impossible to make a difference while hungry. In the old barn, where it all began, Ethan stared at these people who had become family as they shared pie. Past adversaries who have come to trust one another. Lost warriors who'd found their way home. A neighborhood that had found its fortress not in walls but in bridges. There was now more to the Valley Guardians than just a TV show. They showed that even the most heartless people can change when given the chance and the proper environment. The chain reaction began when a former SEAL recalled the lessons his wife had imparted to him. That converting your adversaries into allies might sometimes be more effective than simply defeating them. Ethan sat with his morning coffee, gazing out over a field of blossoming tomato plants, 5 years after their initial confrontation at Mason Farm. This original field still held a special place in the heart of the now expansive campus of hope that was the farm. It was the turning point. "I was hoping to meet you here." The early dew carried Grace's voice. Instead of a pie basket, she was holding a note. "The president's office sent this. Next month was supposed to be the Presidential Medal of Freedom ceremony, but that wasn't the reason." Ethan was smiling. This second letter Grace was carrying came from a Montana hamlet that had recently hosted the opening of the newest chapter of the Valley Guardians. According to Grace, this was their first graduate course. All 27 are veterans and were formerly members of gangs. "Your wife's tomatoes are also being grown by them." After that initial tumultuous night, Grace stored Sarah's heirloom tomato seeds, and now they represent change. They were the first plants in every new rehabilitation center, a constant reminder that development is a result of care and encouragement, not punishment. A familiar roar shattered the morning silence: motorcycles. However, this time the riders had unusual colors: the Valley Guardian symbol, a rising sun atop crossed wheat stalks. After a rescue mission in Tornado hit, Texas, Tank headed the convoy back to their base. Reporting the event, Tank's expression showed signs of exhaustion and pride. Rebuilding dwellings with the help of Death Riders and former Demon Kings. Nobody could believe it, not even the natives. By the time the Valley Guardians were through, they had grown into the nation's biggest group responding to disasters led by veterans. Because of their track record of mending fences between communities, they were in a special position to unite people in times of distress. Those who knew Blade from his violent background were nevertheless astounded by his conflict resolution class at the training center. As he explained to his class, strength has nothing to do with physical prowess. Who can aid in healing is the key. Mental health services were now part of Ghost's medical program. He informed a fresh batch of battlefield medics that their job description had expanded beyond simple wound dressings. "We also tend to the unseen ones." RAZR, who is now providing advice to the DOJ on rehabilitation programs, presented the most recent figures. With 83 rehabilitation clinics and over 10,000 graduates, the success rate is 94%. However, the details were where the true tales of triumph lay. For example, Tommy, who formerly hid from motorcyclists out of fear, is now the program director for the Valley Guardians Juvenile Outreach Initiative. Also, the ex-cartel scout who attempted to join their ranks 3 years ago. Their anti-trafficking efforts were now under his direction. The news that Captain Chen, who was just appointed to the position of commissioner, shared was unexpected. Keeping tabs on gang territories was something we used to do. Currently, we are keeping tabs on transformation zones, which are places where alumni of Valley Guardian are actively working to restore communities. Once a terrifying symbol, the Valley Guardians' national training headquarters had taken over the old Iron Fangs warehouse. The walls that had previously planned bloodshed now bore the banners of triumph. There are many images demonstrating the transformative potential of second chances. The farm had its annual community meal as night fell. Where conflicts once raged, tables now extended out across the meadows. As they shared stories of personal growth, former adversaries shared a meal. As he saw the assembly, Dr. Rivera grinned. Do you know what the most effective treatment ended up being? Sure thing. A sense of belonging. A sense of purpose. Dan, the pastor, gave a knowing nod. Our first goal was to prevent other acts of violence. It came to light that we were restoring spirits. It was only expected that Grace would surpass herself with the pies. Even though her wooden spoon had become more of a ceremonial item than a weapon, she felt that dessert was an essential part of any appropriate celebration. Ethan did something he seldom did, he stood to speak to the audience. Here on this very field, we were given an option 5 years ago. Do something different or respond violently to violent acts. Second chances are powerful, and we've decided to believe in them. He then pointed to the renovated campus in all directions. Buildings and programs weren't what we actually created, though. We created evidence. Evidence that making a change is possible at any time. That with the correct conditions, even the hardest hearts may become more pliable. Unexpectedly, Blade rose to her feet after that. The hard heart was me, he confessed. Imagined I was constructing an eminence. On the contrary, I was erecting a jail. Thanks to these folks, I learned how to develop superior things. Local group. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan took one final stroll around Mason Farm. Through each stride, recollections were tugged. There he had initially faced the Iron Fangs. In this barn, once enemy neighbors became friends. These were the meadows where wanderers finally found rest. Ace came over to him with 2 mugs of coffee. Do you understand my realization? This isn't the place to produce tomatoes, frankly. We are gaining optimism. The memory of Sarah's long ago remarks brought a smile to Ethan's face. Sometimes, the tiniest seeds bear the most fruit. Over time, the Valley Guardians evolved into much more than just a group. Their very existence demonstrated the feasibility of change. That enmity could transform into kinship. Those heroes might discover fresh conflicts worthy of their blood. The belief in second chances held by one former SEAL was the catalyst for it all. A wooden spoon was lovingly held by a grandma. Further, some people opted to construct bridges rather than walls. Stopping violence and rehabilitating veterans weren't the only parts of Mason Farm's narrative. We should never forget that we are all human. And when we decide to tend to it, amazing things begin to happen. The campus lights twinkled like falling stars as dusk enveloped the valley. Every light stands for a life that has been changed. Hearts mend. One who had returned home as a warrior. A hope forest had blossomed from the seeds of transformation, and it had extended far beyond Willow Ridge. Ethan had a sneaking suspicion that Sarah was grinning.
Disclaimer. This channel stands against all forms of intolerance, discrimination, racism, and violations of human rights. The stories shared here are original creations, developed to encourage reflection, understanding, and constructive dialogue. All content is produced with a commitment to respecting diversity and honoring human dignity.